Tensions continue to flare up along the Ukraine's border. President Biden issued yet another warning today that Russia could invade Ukraine within days. And Vice President Kamala Harris is on her way to Germany to meet with leaders there about Russia and Ukraine. To explain more on the ongoing diplomatic efforts and how it's going, we are joined by Stephen Pifer with the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford University and former ambassador to Ukraine. Thank you very much for joining us. Right now, what is your gut reaction listening to all of the play-by-play that's happening?
Well, I think there is still a narrow path for diplomacy, but based on what we've heard today from Washington, from NATO, the Russian military is not withdrawing from Ukraine. And there is a significant concern that, in fact, the Russians may be preparing for a military assault on Ukraine. I very much hope a way can be found to avert that and that the diplomatic dialogue can arrest this, but things are quite concerning.
It seems like we're getting some different messages about the situation, and it seems to be changing almost second by second. Russia would say that they're withdrawing troops, and then they seem to be sending more troops. And then President Biden says that the attack is still imminent. What's the likely scenario there? Will Russia actually invade Ukraine?
Yeah, no, that's the big question we're all trying to get into Vladimir Putin's mind, because ultimately this is a decision that he and he alone will make for Russia. The Russians have said since Monday or since Tuesday that they are withdrawing forces, but neither NATO nor Washington have seen evidence of that. And there's also, in addition to sort of the military intelligence capabilities, one thing we have today is a lot of open source intelligence. People posting things on Facebook and TikTok and such. And those sources also have shown no evidence of a Russian withdrawal. So there is concern that, in fact, the Russians simply lied about this and that they are still maintaining a posture that would give them multiple options for a major attack on Ukraine.
Can you boil it down for us? You know, not everyone dives into international relations all the time. Are there any benefits for Russia invading Ukraine? The threat of it, is that problematic? And what does this mean for someone in the Bay Area? You kind of unpack that. And kind of what do you think is Putin's endgame here?
Well, although the Kremlin has tried to frame this as a crisis between NATO and Russia, it is as much or more about Ukraine. And it's the Kremlin's concern that Ukraine is about to slip irretrievably out of Moscow's orbit. Now, I would argue that's primarily because of Russian policy over the past 8 years. The Russians used military force to seize Crimea from Ukraine, and then they instigated a conflict in Donbass, which has now claimed some 14,000 lives. And so Russian policy has had the effect of pushing Ukraine away from Russia and towards the West. And just one example, 10 years ago in a poll, maybe 20% of Ukrainians would say that they wanted to join NATO. The last poll now says 59% want to join NATO. Now, what does this mean for the United States? I think there are some big issues here. Are we prepared to countenance Russia's blatant use of military force against Ukraine simply because Russia doesn't like Ukraine's foreign policy? Now, President Biden and NATO have made clear that they are not going to send American and NATO troops to defend Ukraine. American forces have gone to Poland, but that's primarily to make clear to the Russians that NATO would defend, or the United States would defend NATO territory. But Washington has said that it would provide military assistance to Ukraine to help them better defend themselves, and also that if Russian military forces again cross into Ukraine, there would be massive sanctions targeted at Russia.
So the vice president is on her way to Munich. Do you think that her involvement is enough? Should the president be more involved?
Well, the vice president is going for this Munich Security Conference, which is an annual event. And she'll have a chance there, for example, to meet with the Ukrainian president, probably German Chancellor Scholz and others. But the president, even though he's not going, I mean, he's been working the phones on this. I'd actually give the administration quite a bit of credit, because over the last 2.5 months, as this crisis has accelerated, they have done a lot in terms of coordination, consultation, both with NATO allies and the European Union. And I think we now, as a result of that, there's a fairly unified Western position, and that's probably surprised the Kremlin.
And then what happens next if Russia does invade Ukraine? What does the U.S. do? You were mentioning sanctions. I mean, is that something that you would foresee if we do go down that way and that diplomatic relations doesn't work?
Yeah, no, I think if the Russians do make the mistake, and I think it would be a mistake, I mean, the biggest cost that would be imposed on the Russians will be imposed by the Ukrainian military and also by Ukrainian guerrillas. I talked to somebody a week ago in Kyiv, and she said that in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, there is now a 2-week waiting list for civilians to take up training on small arms. The Ukrainians will resist. But on top of that, the United States and the European Union have been talking about and developing for now more than 2 months the list of sanctions that would be very painful economically. There would be export controls. There would be a big financial hit on the Russians for this. And also, I believe that if the Russians were to launch the attack, you would see the United States and other European countries provide even more arms and defensive assistance to Ukraine, because there is a strong belief that Ukraine very much would be the victim.
Wow, so much to follow up on. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your insight into this, and no doubt we'll be turning to you again on this.
Thank you.